Okay, so I'm going to be getting onto the Soul Blight Gravelords video pretty soon, but I attended a tournament over the weekend and just wanted to talk about a few of my thoughts about how 4th edition is going after playing a whole bunch of games back to back. I took Soul Blight Gravelords to the tournament, and that's part of the reason why there's a delay in the Soul Blight video, because I thought I'd get some more experience with the army before making it. But I'm just going to run through the sort of 5 games that I played and what I noticed, and sort of some of the trends that I'm seeing about 4th edition. So in game 1, I played against LRL, and the big thing to note is that they had 20 Wardens. I don't imagine this will be uncommon. Most LRL armies are probably going to have 20 Wardens and 20 Sentinels and some other sort of stuff. We'll talk about that more in game 2, because I played LRL there as well. But these 20 Wardens are really difficult to deal with. There's going to be lots of these units. I think these are the units that Vince was talking about with the term porcupine unit. Basically, this unit has like crit mortals, 2 attacks each, 3s and 4s. It's got an extra rend, so it goes up to rend 1 against things that charged. The main thing is it's got an ability that lets it roll a dice, and on a 4-up, it gets strike first if something charged it, right? It can use this ability. So they sort of form a spear wall or whatever, and they get strike first. It's weird that the ability gives them strike first rather than giving the charging thing strikes last, because if you charge them with 3 or 4 things, they don't make each different thing try and strike last. They just get strike first. Or if they're already in combat with something and something else charges, that enables them to somehow go quicker and strike before the other unit that they were already in combat with. It's very weird. I'm sure some of these abilities work by giving the unit that charge strikes last, but I'm pretty sure this one works by giving the Wardens themselves strike first. And these units are really hard to deal with, especially if you don't have much shooting in your army, because that's probably the easiest thing to use against them. If you're unable to charge into them because they're going to kill you, you can just shoot them. But if you're playing a death army or like Slaves to Darkness or something that doesn't have any shooting options, you have to do something else, right? If I charge my Graveguard or my Blood Knights or something, really doesn't matter what unit I charge in there, even Manfred or probably even Vordry. If they get the strikes first thing, there are just so many attacks with mortal wounds that there's a good chance that they're going to take down whatever it is I've thrown into them. So one option is just to absolutely overload them, weather the damage, and just take them out that way, but that's pretty costly. You want to avoid doing that. I'll tell you how I handled it in game 1, because I handled it quite well. But the other options are things like trying to compete in the activation wars, trying to get strikes first yourself. And I'm finding this in a lot of situations. You're going to need some way to get strikes first, or some way to make that unit strikes last. And that's not always easily available, especially if you haven't built your lists around it. Thankfully, I have built my list, so I've got some sources of strike first. Manfred, when he charges, gets it on a 3-up. Vordry can get it from a spell. They also have a spell that's only 12-inch range, but you can make an enemy unit strike last using that. It's very hard to get in 12-inch range of something before you charge it. Like, on the turn you're going to charge it. So very hard to line that one up without using something like Spell Portal. But there are some other options and some other tricks, because everything else in the LRL army had some Sentinels, had some Ballista, some of the Kangaroo guys, which seem really good. Being able to move like 14 and shoot and move again means they can get all the way around the flanks very quickly. Those things are all fine. You can deal with them with just normal positioning and gameplay. But this thing, the 20 Wardens, it's one of those things where if you don't have technology in your list, they'll be an insurmountable problem for you. If they don't roll the 4-up, then it's fine, but you have to plan around them rolling that 4-up because things like game 2 happen. And I'll talk about that in a second. How I dealt with them in the first case is I did some weird sneaky charging. So if you imagine I have like some Graveguard and I've got Manfred, and he comes up to the middle. He was doing seize their land. So he came up to the middle with his Wardens, and I think it's the Venari Lord Regent. And there's a bit of terrain between Manfred and the Graveguard. That's not super important. The main thing that's important is that at the start of my turn, he summoned a Rune of Petrification, sort of here-ish, to try and block my Graveguard, and he hit Manfred as well. And he managed to roll the 3-up on both of them. So actually both Manfred and the Graveguard are strikes last, which is a terrible position to be in because these are really the only 2 units I have in range to deal with this block of Wardens. But the upshot is, or the advantage, is that I can charge this thing and I can charge this thing. So mostly I move the Graveguard up a little bit here, move Manfred and charged in here, and set it up so there was like, if you say this is 3 inches out from the Wardens, there's 3 inches, that's probably a bit long, but 3 inches like this, and there's a spot here where Manfred can end the charge so that he's within 3 inches of the Lord Regent and within half an inch of this endless spell. And the same thing for the Graveguard. They essentially ended up in sort of this sort of configuration. Again, they're just making sure they're 3 inches away from the Wardens. So they weren't able to use their strikes first thing. And even though our strikes last, I was able to activate both of these units before the big block of Wardens. Actually, what I ended up doing was just Manfred got the strikes first, which doesn't really matter in this case, but he was able to just pile towards the Lord Regent. So he'll be in combat range of the Wardens. The Wardens didn't have their 5-up ward that LRL will usually have, but because he'd done Seeds to the Center, he'd moved too far forward and was outside of the range for that. So when I got into combat here, I was able to kill a lot of these things, and it worked out okay. In fact, actually, I think he might have countercharged me, but if he countercharges, he doesn't get the strikes first thing. So getting that 3-up to strikes first actually might have mattered in hindsight. I can't quite remember. Either he did countercharge me and I got the strikes first on the 3-up, so I was able to fight just in turn order and I got to pick first, or he didn't countercharge me and it didn't matter either way. I killed a lot of these Wardens, and then the Graveguard were able to fight twice because they had a Necromancer near them and cleared them up. After that, the game is pretty easy, but it is difficult dealing with that sort of unit. You have to do some weird, sneaky shenanigans, and you have to be like on the lookout for some of these windows, especially with the endless spells. When you got the strikes last off with the Rune of Petrification, I thought, geez, this thing is really screwing up my day. But actually turns out the Rune of Petrification was a really big deal, because otherwise I wouldn't be able to charge like the Lord Regent, wouldn't be able to get within half an inch of him and stay 3 away from the Wardens. The only way I was able to do this charge was because I could end within half an inch of this thing and then still pick the Lord Regent as a pile-in target with the new pile-in rules. So I suppose that's that one. Game 2 was another LRL list, had that 20 Wardens, had 20 Sentinels this time, Dawn Riders, Techless, River Dancers, and Callus and Toll. This list is much more competitive. The first one was a very friendly list that was mostly made for hobby purposes. This Game 2 was a competitive list with a really good player piloting it. It is very, very difficult to deal with them when they get babysat by Techless, so they get the 5-up ward every turn. For people who don't know Techless, he casts like 3 or 4 spells a turn and he gets guaranteed 10s for his rolls. He doesn't have to roll, he just gets a guaranteed 10 instead. And when he unbinds you, he gets a guaranteed 8. Which the unbinding thing is not too harsh, because if you're rolling less than an 8, your spell's probably going to get unbound by a normal wizard. I think it maths out so that unbinding on an automatic 8 is probably pretty similar to just having like +1 to unbind. It's not as oppressive as it looks, but the casting thing is really, really powerful. Being able to cast spells on a 10-up so that you can only unbind them on an 11 or a 12. I don't know why they didn't just make it so that he casts on an 8, because rolling a 9-up is hard enough. It's pretty much impossible to unbind Techless without really powerful unbind bonuses, which are really hard to find. So he gets these spells off every turn. He gets his 5-up ward, guaranteed. He can do things like make the Wardens move faster and summon endless spells, which is mostly what he was doing. And yeah, dealing with those Wardens actually fight like Graveguard when they're buffed up. Graveguard get a 5-up ward from standing near another hero. They've got 2 attacks each with crit mortals, and they're like 3s and 3s, 1 rend, 1 damage. Wardens, 3s and 4s, and they're rend 1 when you charge them, 1 damage. They get crit mortals as well with the 5-up ward from the spell, so they're basically Graveguard. But in addition, they've got like a built-in on a 4-up, they'll strike first, and if you use like Power of Haish or something, then they get crits on a 5 or a 6, so they do an absolute ton of damage. My big mistake this game was trying to take them on with the Graveguard and trying to seize the center. Basically, my opponent outdropped me from the die roll. We're both 3 drops, but he got the die roll. I had to do seize the center, and I really should have just given up the battle tactic turn 1, I think, or committed more to it. But we were playing the bye, so the objectives were so far in the corner. I didn't want to commit everything to the middle. I probably should have just waited, failed the battle tactic on turn 1, got the underdog position, and use those command points to get back in the game later on. At the start, I lost my Graveguard, and I just put myself in a bad position in general. So advancing into the middle there, I think a bad idea. Mostly that's what lost me the game. I also think these sorts of units, the strategy that I needed to have, this player wasn't going to give me that same opportunity to sneak into his Wardens and get around their strikes first thing. I needed to use Vordry, cast the spell, know I was going to have strikes first, and then charge into that unit with Vordry. Vordry can probably survive most of those crit mortals, as long as they don't have Power of High-ish, which they weren't using it on that every single turn. They were using it on like the Sentinels and things like that as well. And if I got into them with Vordry, with the strikes first, even if they got strikes first, I'd be able to activate, do an all-out attack, and chew through most of those Wardens without too much trouble. But as it was, they fought the Graveguard in the middle. I lost most of my Graveguard. I swung back. I did kill about 6 of them, but then he did a rally, and I think got all 6 of them back off the rally. I think he rolled 7 dice and got either all 4-ups or at least the 6 of them. And that was pretty crushing. It was very, very hard to come back from that. I had Borderai too far away, and Teclis was able to just summon a wall of endless spells pretty much every single turn that made it impossible for Vorderai to land anywhere and to charge anything. And that was a bit frustrating. I think I'll talk a bit more about manifestations, but they're mostly okay, except when I was coming up against Teclis, I was like, oh, I really see the problem that people are talking about with manifestations in a way that it wasn't super apparent in other games that I'd played of 4th edition. I think that's probably enough about LRL. I'm keen to move past it and not play against LRL anytime soon. Or while we're here, I suppose the 20 Sentinels is still very good, still very efficient to have a reinforced shooting unit. Covering fire is definitely very, very valuable. I'm not sure they get their 24-inch range on both turns, but even just having an 18-inch range, they were still doing a ton of damage. The crit auto wound is a really big deal for covering fire. It still gives them a lot of extra damage in a turn where otherwise they'd have a big penalty to their damage. So I think that'll be something that sticks around. And in particular, once we get battle tomes and things like that, it'll be something that you continue to see grow in power. The shooting will get better, and covering fire will get noticeably more worrisome as the edition progresses. That's my prediction for it anyway. One more thing about this is my opponent used priority target on the unit of Sentinels. That gives them +1 to hit and wound against anything in my General's regiment, and that works on covering fire as well. I do have control over exactly what they shoot at, but it doesn't feel good sacrificing anything to that covering fire. Pretty much they're just getting free damage every single turn by just standing anywhere within 18 of the Sentinels, but it is really hard to avoid standing within 18 of them. They do cover a really large portion of the board. In any case, I think mostly I lost that game because I played really poorly. My opponent made a really big mistake at the start, not by playing poorly, just a sort of a silly mistake. They didn't deploy their army correctly. They deployed off the objectives because they didn't realize where they were. But yeah, even still, they beat me because they're a much better player. Game 3, Morbeg Knights. I played against Feck, and it was a Feck list with like Usharon and 12 Morbeg Knights, a 6 and 2 3s. And this game felt like 3rd edition Age of Sigmar. There's no shooting, which is nice. But these knights, I think they move 12 base, then they get like +2 from a spell, and run and charge on a 3-up from, there's like a judge looking guy who condemns some dude, and if you move towards that unit that you've condemned, you get run and charge. So it's very, very easy to give run and charge to a whole bunch of units. So essentially these guys can move 20 before they charge. That's pretty absurd. Very, very hard to avoid. They got fly as well, so they don't have to worry about terrain or anything in the way. It's very hard to screen them off because, they can get within 3 of the screen and then charge over the top of them. They're not that big a unit. There's only 6 of them in there, so they don't have coherency problems or anything. It's very, very difficult to avoid just getting pasted by these things. And so for the first 2 turns, we played really cagey. I was playing really far back. He didn't want to commit because he couldn't get to the right targets. And eventually, I think he just did a big wheel around the board. I sort of had stuck to the very edges of the board, and he clipped a unit, clipped another unit, clipped another unit, and just worked his way around the board and wasn't able to respond to it very well. The main thing, I lost a really pivotal turn. That was a battle tactic where I moved Manfred 3 away from some Morbeg Knights and summoned some Graveguard behind them. They got a redeploy on a 4, and they were able to just squeeze just round behind the Graveguard in a very, very narrow spot. And because of the redeploy, I had to reroll the charge on Manfred. I didn't have the command point for an all-out attack or a power through, and that Morbeg Knight survived on 1 health and denied me a battle tactic. That was pretty crushing, but there's nothing too much to learn from that game other than some of these units deal a lot of damage. I remember when we were coming into the edition, I was thinking, the damage is going to be a lot lower. A lot of these War Scrolls hit on 4s or worse. There's a lot of -1 to hit. Something I didn't mention in the LRL list, basically the whole army has -1 to hit, which is very awkward for using people like Manfred or Vordry to deal with things like Wardens, because you have -1 to hit. Even if you get in there first, you're hitting on 5s with the mount attacks. You have to do an all-out attack. There's a good chance you still miss anyway. So there's a bit of a problem there. I didn't mention, I did charge Manfred into those Wardens at some point, and I thought, if I get the 3 up, then I'm fine. I'll strikes first. Even if he strikes first as well, it's my turn, so I'll have the activation order priority. I'll be able to activate before him. If we both fail, that's fine. Same thing. If I succeed and he fails, then all the better. I get strikes first and he doesn't get strikes first. That's neat. There's only one situation where that goes wrong for me, which is that I fail my roll and he succeeds his. It's a 3 up for me to fail and a 4 up for him to succeed. So it's a 1 in 6 chance that the strikes first doesn't work. And I just rolled the 1. I got unlucky. And Manfred got taken down to battle damage before he activated. He loses 2 out of his 5 good attacks when he's battle damaged. So that cost me quite a lot there. And because he was battle damage, it wasn't worth activating. It wasn't worth using all-out attack. I had another charge I needed all-out attack on. Turns out that one didn't work anyway, but that was just bad luck on the dice, I think. So yeah, the Morbeg Knights, they do a ton of damage. It's still very much a thing that units will get wiped out in one go. Ushran does an absolute truckload of damage as well. He's a bit swingy, as are most of the monsters. On my side, Vordry does a lot of damage. Manfred can do a lot of damage. Going into the edition, I thought the damage level would be lower, but with the synergies, I really don't think it is. I think people are working out their lists. They're working out what's good and what's not. And as people fine-tune their lists, there are certainly some really, really big hitters still out there. So I'm not sure the damage is less all round. Certainly, I went into the tournament thinking my 20 Graveguard with a 4-up armor save and a 5-up ward would be damn near impenetrable. But no, they go down really quickly. I don't know in Soulblight that you really have a true anvil. You used to be able to have maybe 30 skeleton warriors. That was pretty durable, but you can't double reinforce now. So I don't know that we really have a true anvil anywhere in the book. We have a lot of chaff and a lot of screens and a lot of stuff that can take a middle power hit, but nothing that can really take a big hit and survive it. All right, game 4. I played against Cruel Boys. I've played against Cruel Boys before in 4th edition, and they're really awkward to play against as an army. There's a lot of things that they can do. Teleporting in your turn is a big deal. You pick something as a battle tactic, they can teleport units over there. You pick a unit to kill as a battle tactic, they can teleport away. Same thing with, he had Sneaky Scumbag. That's probably going to be the heroic trait of choice on the Vulture. So that means that he can retreat on a 3-up at the start of combat. It's very hard to get in combat with this guy. And mostly the way he used him was charging into combat, getting they have like an ogre charge on the Vulture now. So it like swoops in, does a bunch of impact hits, and he actually rolled at least 2 10s, did lots and lots of impact hits throughout that game. And I think out of about the 5 retreat rolls, he's successful in every single one of them. It's a very tricky ability he used to really great effect. He would charge into something, do a bunch of impact hits, fly over it, get onto an objective, or take their land by getting onto some piece of terrain in my backfield. That game I use a lot of manifestations to guard my back area. The restriction on sneaky sneaking, the teleporting that Cruel Boys can do is they have to end wholly within 3 of a terrain piece and 9 away from enemies. So I actually put a lot of endless spells in my backfield, just sitting on terrain pieces pretty much to stop him being able to deploy anywhere near those terrain pieces. Sure, he could have banished them. I think I killed the Swamp Caller fairly early on in the game, so that wasn't too much of an issue. But even they can retreat out of combat and still use the teleport. Some of these teleports are core abilities, so you can't move and then teleport. But for the Cruel Boys, it's just a dirty trick. So they, the 20 Gut Rippers, I charged into, did a bunch of damage, dropped them below the 10 threshold. They were able to retreat, teleport across to the other side of the board, and start doing battle tactics. It's very, very frustrating, very hard to deal with. But the main thing is that those 20 Gut Rippers have a noisy racket ability. It's not just the Gut Rippers, it's a dirty trick as well, where they make a unit strikes last, pretty much. So if you charge into these 20 Gut Rippers, they're just like Wardens, right? They've got 2 attacks each with crit mortals, and they can get extra bonuses like crits on a 5-up and 2 damage or something like this. They can get poison from the Swamp Caller Shaman, I'm not sure exactly what it does, and they can get 2 damage in their turn from the Sludge Raker. But they can be a really prickly unit as well, where if you charge in, you'll get strikes last. This time it's the good version for the attacker, because you can charge multiple units in and they can't make them all strike last. It doesn't give the Gut Rippers unit strikes first or anything, but they can give the unit that you're charging in with strikes last. And that makes it just, for a melee-only army, really, really difficult to deal with unless you're able to make them strike last or able to give your unit strike first. So multiple situations where I found if I didn't have these tools, if I didn't have Vordry or Manfred in my list, or if I even thought about maybe swapping out my endless spells for taking spell portal so that I could cast the strikes last spell from a further distance, because there were just so many situations that I was coming up against where I really couldn't do anything about specific units in my opponent's army because they had strikes first and did enough damage to deal with me. There's like, I have to use some really, really funky tricks to deal with these sorts of things. And sometimes if your opponent's playing well, you just don't have those tricks open to you. I'm not sure I love this aspect about the game because a lot of these things are just on dice rolls. It felt terrible in game 2 when I just failed those rolls. I was probably going to lose that game anyway just because I'd misplayed. I should have been using Vordry to deal with those Wardens. But, you know, at the end of the day, like, I would put it in a die roll, but it's a 1 in 6 chance. It just sucks that you have to put it on a die roll, that people like Manfred or units like Manfred don't just get strikes first when they charge. It's only on a 3-up, and the same on their end as well. The Wardens don't just get strikes first on a turn that they're charged. They have to roll the 4-up, and it just means that you never quite know what's going to happen. The whole activation shifts on one die roll. Whether you go first or second should be, in my mind, shouldn't be something that comes down to just rolling a dice. If it were part of the core mechanics of the game, if you just, at the start of the turn, when you did fight activation order, imagine instead of I go, you go, it was like roll a dice and the person who rolls higher picks something. And then you get to pick something. Like every single fight was just, you do a roll off, the person who wins higher picks one, and then the other person picks one. Then you do a roll off. Person who wins picks one, and then the other person picks one. That would be a really frustrating system, and it would be very hard to like play strategically and tactically, not knowing who's going to fight first, because the damage is still really high, because a lot of these interactions are still my unit wipes your unit out entirely. And you'll have a lot of these situations where both units would wipe each other out, and it's just whoever gets these rolls for striking first. It's the difference between doing 100% damage and 0% damage. And I really don't like that. I really would have preferred a system where hitting first helps, but like it's unlikely to make the difference between wiping a unit out or not wiping the unit out. And I think some of these units, like Wardens and Gut Rippers and things like that, might have too high a damage output, or maybe it's that Soulblight Gravelords just don't have enough durability. Maybe it's just the army that I'm playing. I'm sure other armies have different tools. Like if you're a shooting army, you can deal with that a lot more easily. But for me, I found that a very, very difficult challenge to get around. All right. The last game I played against Archaon and Be'lakor. And this list has like 7 units, I think. It's like Archaon, Be'lakor, 5 of Knights, 5 of Chosen, some Furies, and some Raptorics. And pretty much at the start of the game, I positioned very far back. I didn't want Archaon to charge onto my home objective of playing Border Wars. And I would try to do take the flanks, because it's one of those where you deploy 9 off the edges, so I put my cavalry on the flanks so that I could do a turn 1, take the flanks. He was going to outdrop me with only 2 drops in his army. And that plan pretty much worked. On my turn, I did take the flanks, move the Knights up. He answered my Black Knights with Be'lakor and answered my Blood Knights and Manfred with some Knights of his own, mostly just taking the objective. The big thing, though, that swung the game was in my first turn, I pretty much got every one of my spells on a 10+. I just rolled really, really well. I had +1 to cast from my sub-faction, and I had +1 to cast from Place of Power for at least 2 of those casts. But I remember I got the Gravetide and the Purple Sun and the Maelstrom and also Vordry's Strike First spell. I got a lot of spells off successfully, and my opponent failed pretty much all of his spells. I remember him rolling 5s for pretty much everything, and all the chaos spells go off on a 7. And I was in unbind range anyway. So the big thing for him is he needs to get that 3d6 charge spell off on Archaon, so that Archaon can get out there and do something, because I'd positioned so far away. But if he had that 3d6 to charge spell, Archaon could have gone somewhere and just wiped something out. And just on the success of my spells, being able to clog up the board with manifestations, and on the failure of his spells, not getting the movement that Archaon needed, pretty much he was stuck just due to chance, which was pretty rough for him for turn 1. Be'lakor obviously beat up the Black Knights pretty well, but then they just retreated off next turn. The big mistake I think he made is he didn't use the Dark Master on turn 2. I think he used the Eye of Sheeran so that we knew the priority order was going to be me next. And then when I got priority, he didn't use Dark Master on anything. He just decided not to. And then Vordry was able to get his Strikes First spell off again, fly over to Be'lakor, and actually just drop him down to 1 wound. And because I was the underdog from the first round, I had enough command points to just throw things like did the all-out attack, and I did the power through, and Vordry was able to take Be'lakor out in 1 turn. And also on the other side, because I had like Purple Sun and I had Knights and Manfred, I was able to take out his unit, Chaos Knights, and from there he just has so few units left. I was able to do something tricky as well. The Furies I hit with Soul Snare Shackles, and I think I hit them twice with that. So they'll drop down to 1 Fury. And then when I charged the Knights with the Maelstrom, I could charge behind the Knights because it's a flying thing and it got a high enough roll. When I killed I should draw it out a little bit just quickly. So the Knights are sort of on this point with Manfred here, and I think Maelstrom is like here somewhere. And there's a single lone Fury by himself over here. And basically I could charge the Maelstrom over here, charge a whole bunch of units in, kill these Knights that were here. And because this Maelstrom is not in combat with the Fury, it doesn't get the chance to retreat on a 3-up. But this Maelstrom is able to pile any direction it likes because the Knights are dead. It was able to pile over and finish off that 1 Fury, which otherwise would be a very, very annoying unit to deal with. So this army that started with only like 7 units in his army was already down 2 units. And one of them a really significant one, Be'lakor, didn't even get to use his main ability. Pretty much from there, it was game. We played another turn, I think, but things weren't going great, and he was very far out of position. He was going to lose his Chosen, and he did do something that I thought was very interesting. There was a terrain feature on my side of the board, and I had some Endless Spell I think I had Shackles somewhere in the middle of the board like this. And his Chosen were like over here, very, very far away. But he was able to charge the Shackles, and then he destroyed them, I think, with the Raptorix. I'm not sure exactly. Oh, he used Archeon has an anti-manifestation rampage, I think. He killed the Shackles and then just double pile-ined the Chosen to get within 3 of the terrain feature and score, take their land. So those guys, they rocketed across the board. They had their movement and the charge and 2 more pile-ins after that. They went basically from their deployment zone to wholly within my territory, deep within my territory in the 1 turn, which that was pretty cool to see. But didn't win him the game. It was really just an effort to get some more points before the Chosen got wiped out by the Graveguard. So that was it for the tournament. Overall, I went 3-2. Good fun. I really like 4th edition. Plays very smoothly, very quickly. There's a lot fewer rules, but some of the rules are pretty complicated for people to get their head around. I think through the whole day, everyone was playing Place of Power as though you can only use it once per turn. Even me, I was playing that. You can only use it once per turn, but just loading it up, I'll show you. You can use it with a whole bunch of heroes. So Place of Power. Okay, so when I say use it once per turn, only 1 hero could use it. That's how pretty much everyone played it that I played against, and I was playing it like that the whole day. But afterwards, I had a look at Place of Power, and it says you pick a friendly hero within 3 of this Place of Power to use this ability. And it's a start of any turn ability. So it's not the terrain feature that uses the ability, and it's not the player that uses it. It's the actual unit using the ability. I don't know why this snuck by everyone at the tournament, but what this means is it's the only restriction on using this ability multiple times is that a unit can't use the same ability more than once in the same phase. That's the rule of 1s. But different units can use the same ability in the same phase. There's no restriction on that. So long as you have multiple heroes within 3 of any places of power, then each hero that's in 3 could use it, presumably. Which I didn't notice at the first, but very useful. Bonuses to cast are really, really useful in the edition. There are lots of spells that go off on a 7, and in your opponent's turn, you'll have -1 to cast. So using the Place of Power is really, really valuable. You want to get above your opponent's Unbind. Just +1 to cast is really good to have in general. Having all those manifestations. Manifestations are really cooked, really broken at the moment, and being able to cast them is get past that Unbind and force your opponent to spend time banishing them. That's also really, really useful. All right. So just some things that I noticed. Obviously, there was that thing. The manifestations. Geez, manifestations are something. They're not the most fun thing in the world. I kind of like them when they're happening in your own turn, right? They're okay when you have to summon them 9 away and they don't move in the same turn. Then they got to wait in your opponent's turn. They still don't move, and then it gets back to your turn, and then they can move. Okay. You got to do some pre-planning. It gives your opponent a chance to banish them. Like, they seem pretty fair when you have to summon them in your own turn. When you can summon them in your opponent's turn, though, they get a lot more nutty. Especially like playing against Teclis. Teclis just gets the 10. He doesn't get modified by the -1 to cast as well, so he's just getting the 10 even when he's using magical intervention. And being able to summon the thing like without the chance to banish it and without a chance to like strategize around it, I think is much more oppressive. You pick a battle tactic, you do your hero phase stuff, so you're casting spells and doing things with the intention of building towards a certain plan, and then that changes based on whether or not they get that magical intervention. Some of these abilities, like the Rune of Petrification, giving units strike last, the Feck Wall that is impassable, Soul Snare Shackles is a really common one, just giving you penalties to your movement. Those things are really, really easy to use and very disruptive. They take up a lot of space. Morbid Conjuration, it was everywhere through the weekend. It was just really common to see people just summoning the volume of spells. It didn't really matter which ones. People were just getting a lot of them onto the table. It's very hard to keep track of. I don't think I saw anyone ever keep track of when a wizard died, the spells that it had summoned also die. I didn't keep track of that either. It's very hard because there's no link between the wizard and the spell. You don't have to constantly keep track of it. You only have to keep track of it when they summon it and then when the thing dies. So it's very, very easy to lose track of which wizard summoned which endless spell. And I expect a lot of people didn't have much fun with the endless spells. So I think there'll be a change to them. Might just be a change to Morbid Conjuration, to the endless spells themselves. Or there might be a change, like you can't summon them with magical intervention, or you get some sort of penalty for your casting if you've got a manifestation out, if you're trying to control one or something like that. Who knows? But I'll expect some kind of change to manifestations at some point. I guess the other thing is, if you're not a shooting army, it's very, very difficult to deal with the movement implications of them. If you summon something like Gravetide in front of your unit, it's very hard to charge that unit, mostly with things that have big bases. So I'm trying to fly Vordry around and charge into people, and frequently what was happening is they would just summon an endless spell kind of where I need to put Vordry to fight them, like on the landing site, and there's no way for me to really successfully deal with that. If I get lucky with Vordry's shooting, I could kill one, but I don't think that happened all weekend. In some cases, the endless spells just are very, very good. They do a lot of damage. Gravetide is a good example of this. I had a couple games where I summoned like 10 skeletons in the backline for take their land, and an endless spell flew over and took them out. 10 skeletons is not a hard target, but it's also 100 points, and the spell is not 100 points. It's doing a lot more damage than other spells, right? So like Manfred, for example, has Wind of Death, which is like you pick a point and you pick 3 units, and you do D3 mortals to the 3 units near that point. That's the same sort of damage that Soul Snare Shackles is doing, and Soul Snare also has a movement penalty and leaves them around so that they can do it again next turn, and so on and so forth. The gap between what non-endless spells are doing and what the endless spells are doing is pretty big in a lot of cases, especially in terms of damage, which I don't necessarily hate, but it does make you feel bad when you're left with casting those non-manifestation spells. I think it would be nice, especially in armies like Soulblight, where you don't have shooting. Having some magic damage output would be really handy. Being able to chip away at things like Wardens and Gut Rippers. I use Vile Transference to try and do damage in these cases. Like I think I'm rolling 20 dice. I should get 3 or 4 mortal wounds out of this. Nope, got 2. I think I killed 1 Gut Ripper with Vile Transference. So I heal 1. Super useful. Magic damage is really, really low. Even in armies that have quite good magic. Most of the time, the good magic is just special effects and bonuses. And if you want to do damage with magic, it's through some of these manifestations, which more act like units than spells. It doesn't really feel like you're casting a powerful spell. It just feels like you're summoning a unit, right? Which is kind of what you're doing. I talked about those porcupine units. If your army doesn't have access to strike first, strike last stuff, then you're in a real pickle. I don't know what you do about a lot of these units. They just do tons of damage and have strikes first built into them. I think most armies will have some sort of access to strike first or giving your enemy strikes last. But for me, that's a core part of building the list. When I play Soulblight, I'm probably going to stick to having Manfred or having Vordry in the list. So I've got at least 2 sources. I've got the spell that I can use to try and make someone strike last if they get within 12. But I also have a bit more of an offensive source like Vordry or Manfred that I can pretty reliably get strike first on. 3-up's not that reliable, but it gives me an option when I find myself in those situations, which I'm going to find myself in those situations quite a lot. The underdog stuff, I didn't talk about this much because I didn't really learn it until later in the game. After game 2, pushing into the center, getting seized the center, and then getting wiped out, I thought it was the wrong move. And I tried in some later games just pulling back on the points in turn 1 and turn 2 a little bit. And boy, it works pretty well. It works probably too well. You drop a tactic or you drop an objective or just even 1 point on Border War, you can drop points in turn 1, put yourself in the underdog position, and for the next 2 turns you get the extra command point. And on some battle plans the underdog bonus is twisted. It is really good. Not in Border War, but in some of the other ones, that underdog is very, very valuable. I think in the one that I played before it against Crawl Boys, it was the one, I think it's called Close to the Chest, where you pick a primary objective. The underdog bonus is that when they pick their primary objective, you can roll a dice, and on a 5-up, you can force them to pick a different one. That is a very interesting underdog bonus. You do have to roll the 5-up, but I did roll the 5-up, and that shifts their primary objective. That's quite a big deal. Makes it very hard for them to guard it, and you can get a lot of your points back and really get back in the game. But then you also have this advantage of extra command points, and a lot of the time you're winning on board, because when you went down points in the first turn or the first 2 turns, the reason you're going down is for a superior position. So you're trading points for board control, for better engagements or better trades and better positioning, and then you can leverage those things to win the points back anyway. So having the underdog bonus is often not necessary. Like, often you're in a better position from your decisions in turn 1 or 2 anyway, just playing a bit more cagey and a bit safer. And then having that bonus really pushes it over the edge. Gives you so many options. You get so many more all-out attacks, which are really valuable with the heroes that hit on 4s. And I think maybe some of those underdog bonuses need to be tuned down a little bit, especially on the battle plans. I think the 1 command point is very good and probably good enough by itself. You don't need the battle plan propping it up, and especially some battle plans, it's more than others. Damage and durability, I did mention this, still seems like damage is very high. It's still, if you get hit by a hammer unit, it still gets cleared off the table. It's harder to screen now. A lot of the foot screens are really small. In that final game, the guy playing, he had Furies and Raptorics, and I asked him about it because when I read the Chaos book, I thought, why would you play Raptorics? They just seem like worse version of Furies. And he said, well, these guys, they have an extra wound each, so they don't immediately die to shooting, which the Furies, they do die to shooting very quickly. But the other thing is, Raptorics are just the big, they're the direwolf small cavalry base. So it's much bigger than the Fury. They've got 6 of them. So this thing is a really, really big screen for only 100 points. And I made me think, actually, I probably won't go out and buy 2 boxes of beasts and, ditch the Raptorics and just stick with the Furies. I'll just buy 1 box, use the Raptorics and the Furies, because he made a pretty good point. If you don't have those cavalry bases, a lot of the units that I used to use to screen, like skeletons, are really not very good screens anymore. I think you have to have 20 models in the unit, or you have to have the bigger base size or something else to protect your units. And you still need screens because you still do get wiped out very quickly by a lot of these units. Even things like Morbeg Knights, it's just very, very awkward to try and protect yourself from them because they have flying, because they move so fast, and even sometimes screens aren't enough. You need to do the thing where there's actually no room for the Knights to get into the back line. Place of Power, already mentioned that. And I should mention the -1 to hit stuff. -1 to hit is a very strong buff. I think a lot of units hitting on the 4-up, especially hitting on the 4-up on their companion weapons, this is huge. If you look at like Manfred's profile, Manfred has like 5 attacks, which are 4s and 2s, -3 damage on the mount. Absolutely punishing if you get those 4-ups, but those are so swingy. And if you get pushed down to 5-ups, it cuts the unit's damage so much. It just falls off a cliff. So -1 to hit is a really big deal, and some armies just have access to a lot of it. If you play LRL, you can have most of your army, all the Venari stuff, which is all the Dawn Riders, the Sentinels, the Wardens, like most of your list is -1 to hit pretty much the whole time, and it just makes it very, very difficult to deal with, given how much more accessible -1 to hit is than +1 to hit, because really the only way you can access +1 to hit on the companion weapons is through all-out attack, and a lot of armies just don't have any other way to get +1 to hit. A lot of the buffs are stuck on these stupid heroes where you have to fight with them and then fight with the other unit immediately after, and those are just not practical. They don't really work at all. I didn't really see anyone using them because they're horrible. So a lot of armies just don't have access to a way to counteract this -1 to hit. And so when you come up against an army about it, you don't really have any other options. Like I said, magic doesn't do much damage. And you don't have shooting if you're like Death or lots of armies don't have shooting, so you're just sort of stuck dealing a lot less damage, which can be pretty punishing and leave you in a situation where you're like, I don't really know how to deal with this. Okay, just a little bit on Soulblight. I'm going to do this Soulblight Battle Tome pretty much immediately after this, but just a few things that I noticed from playing the army. They're very low damage, and that meant that the games went really long. Overall, they're much faster to play than they used to be. They're a lot less tedious with all the coherency and stuff. You don't have to worry about a lot of things you used to have to worry about. There's a lot less keeping track of stuff. I just find they have streamlined the rules a lot, but even with a really high pace of play, the army brings back a lot of units, stays in the game a really long time, moves around the board a lot, like summons things in lots of places, has a lot of options, and doesn't really kill the opponent. So both of you are playing with a lot of units right the way up until turn 4 and 5. There's still a lot of units on the board for both players in a lot of situations. So because of that, the games go really long. And in the tournament, even though I was keeping up a fairly decent pace of play and my opponents were keeping up a decent pace of play, I timed out in, I think, 3 of my 5 games. And every time I timed out, my opponent also had this reaction like, oh, are we running overtime? Like, I thought we were playing quickly. So it certainly didn't seem like there was a really slow pace of play or anything. Just the army itself is really hard to run at a tournament. I didn't even have a lot of models. Like, my list was Vordry Manfred, 5 Blood Knights, 10 Black Knights, a 10 of Skeletons, a 20 of Graveguard, and a Necromancer. But there are other lists that you could have 60 Skeleton Warriors and or 80 Zombies or something like that. Those lists would be a really, really slow, tedious game to play. You would need to make good use of movement trays, and even then, I think it would just be so slow because you can bring every single one of those units back at half strength. There's just so many models and so much moving and so much time for everything, positioning everything so you're wholly in 6 and all that sort of stuff. Even if you do it quickly, it just takes a lot of time compared to other armies. And that's really the main reason I stopped taking Soulblight to tournaments. It might still be the case, even though it does seem much faster and smoother. All right, so I'll leave it there for that. I'll talk about them a lot more in the faction video, which I'm going to film now. But those are my thoughts. I just wanted to get them down really quickly before, I guess, I forget about everything in that tournament. I'll be having a Spearhead, sort of a few games of Spearhead in a couple of weeks. I'll be picking up Sylvaneth for that, so I'll have some thoughts on that when that comes around, and hopefully I'll have done maybe the Sylvaneth book next after the Soulblight one. So I'll leave it there for this one, and yeah, expect that Soulblight video in the next couple of days.